The city called her untouchable, but on the night she finally leaned forward and kissed the man she believed was nothing more than her quiet contract husband. She had no idea she was placing her lips on the ruler of an empire that had existed long before the first skyscraper pierced the American skyline. She smiled for only a second before distant explosions shook the windows of the penthouse behind them. The lights across downtown flickered one after another, turning the glittering skyline into patches of darkness. She looked over her shoulder, confused, while the man she knew as Noah Carter, the reserved security guard she had hired months earlier, never took his eyes off the horizon. His expression didn't change. His heartbeat didn't quicken. It was almost as if he had expected this exact moment. She reached for his hand, asking what was happening, but before he could answer, a deafening blast erupted from the headquarters of Sterling Global Industries, the company she had spent her entire life building. Flames burst through the upper floors of the glass tower, painting the night sky a deep crimson. Employees who had been working late ran screaming into the streets as thick smoke rolled across the city. Police sirens echoed from every direction, but they would never arrive in time to stop what had already begun. The attack had been planned for months, and every person responsible believed the woman standing on that rooftop would be dead before sunrise. What they never imagined was that the ordinary security guard standing beside her was the only reason she had survived every attempt on her life long before this one. The world knew her as Charlotte Bennett, the youngest female CEO ever to lead one of America's largest technology empires. Magazine covers praised her intelligence. Investors admired her fearless decisions. Competitors feared her ruthless negotiations. To millions of people, she looked like the perfect success story, a woman who transformed tragedy into power after losing both parents while still in college. Few people knew how lonely that success truly was. Charlotte trusted contracts more than promises, security systems more than friendships, and business reports more than emotions. Love had become nothing more than a distraction she refused to entertain. Yet standing beside her now was the one man she had never been able to understand. Noah rarely smiled, rarely spoke unless necessary, and accepted every insult from executives without defending himself. To the board of directors, he looked completely out of place, a man whose inexpensive suit and security badge made him invisible in rooms filled with billionaires. They laughed whenever Charlotte promoted him from the lobby to her personal protection detail. They whispered that their brilliant CEO had finally made a foolish decision. They never questioned why every threat against her seemed to disappear before reaching her office. They simply called it luck. The flames climbing the tower reflected in Charlotte's eyes as she watched pieces of burning glass crash onto the streets below. Her breathing became uneven. Every important document, every confidential project, every employee she considered family was inside that building only minutes earlier. She reached for her phone, desperate to call emergency services, but Noah gently lowered her hand. His calmness unsettled her more than the fire itself. Before she could ask why he looked so composed, hundreds of dark shapes rose from behind the burning skyscraper and filled the night sky. At first, she believed the smoke was playing tricks on her vision, but as they drew closer, she realized they were bats, thousands of them circling above the building in perfect silence. Even the screams below seemed to disappear beneath the strange stillness that settled over the city. Then her phone vibrated. One message appeared on the screen from an unknown number. "Your empire falls tonight. Your husband dies first. Then you." Charlotte felt every ounce of confidence leave her body. She slowly looked toward Noah, expecting fear, but instead found him staring into the darkness beyond the flames as though he were waiting for someone to arrive. Engage in our comment section and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Drop your location below. And subscribe now so you never miss any of our new videos. What happened next would become a story no newspaper could explain, no police investigation could solve, and no surviving witness would ever fully remember. As armed vehicles surrounded the headquarters below, dozens of masked assassins stepped into position with military precision, their rifles aimed toward the rooftop where Charlotte and Noah stood alone. Every escape route had already been blocked. Every elevator had been disabled. Every security camera inside the building had suddenly gone offline exactly 3 minutes before the explosions began. Whoever orchestrated this attack possessed extraordinary resources and knew every weakness inside Sterling Global. Charlotte's greatest rivals had spent years trying to bankrupt her company through lawsuits, cyber attacks, hostile takeovers, and corporate espionage, but none of those plans had succeeded. Tonight they had abandoned the boardroom and chosen violence instead. Charlotte's hands trembled for the first time in years as she realized this was no negotiation she could win with intelligence or determination. This was an execution carefully disguised as corporate revenge. She whispered Noah's name, telling him they needed to run while there was still time, but he remained perfectly still. His eyes never left the approaching figures emerging from the smoke. The wind carried the scent of burning steel across the rooftop as the assassins slowly closed the distance, convinced their targets had nowhere left to hide. None of them realized they were walking toward a man who had spent centuries waiting for the moment he would no longer have to hide who he truly was. Charlotte's pulse pounded against her chest as the line of armed men advanced across the rooftop, each step measured, each rifle fixed on her. She had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without showing fear, stood before hostile shareholders without lowering her voice, and rebuilt her company after devastating financial losses. Yet nothing in her life had prepared her for the sight unfolding before her. The leader of the assassins removed his mask, revealing a scar stretching from one side of his face to the other. He smiled as though he had already won. "Charlotte Bennett," he called out, "your board sold you for a price you never imagined. They said once you disappeared, Sterling Global would belong to them by sunrise." Charlotte instinctively stepped backward, but Noah moved in front of her with quiet confidence. His posture remained relaxed, almost careless, as though the dozens of rifles pointed at him were nothing more than an inconvenience. The assassins laughed among themselves. One of them mocked the expensive wedding ring on Noah's finger and asked whether the billionaire CEO had truly married a security guard because she had finally run out of wealthy men willing to tolerate her. Charlotte clenched her fists, ready to defend him, but Noah slightly raised one hand, silently asking her to remain behind him. She had seen him protect her before, but never with this strange certainty that seemed to settle over him whenever danger appeared. It was as though he had already seen the outcome before the first shot was fired. Months earlier, before the wedding, Charlotte had believed hiring Noah Carter was nothing more than another business decision. After receiving a series of anonymous death threats, her chief of security insisted that every member of her personal protection team undergo replacement. Candidates from elite military units arrived with decorated careers and impressive records, yet none of them caught Charlotte's attention. Then Noah walked into the interview wearing a simple black suit that looked several years old. His resume contained almost nothing. No prestigious recommendations, no remarkable achievements, no family references. Even his previous employers described him as quiet and dependable rather than exceptional. Charlotte nearly dismissed him within minutes, but before she could end the interview, Noah calmly informed her that someone had planted an explosive device beneath the conference table. The room fell silent. Security officers searched the area, expecting to prove him wrong, only to discover a professionally assembled bomb hidden exactly where he had described. The building was evacuated before it could detonate. When investigators demanded to know how Noah had discovered it, he simply answered that he noticed details other people overlooked. Charlotte could not explain why, but something about the way he spoke convinced her to offer him the position immediately. From that day forward, every attack against her somehow failed. A speeding truck lost control before reaching her vehicle. A sniper abandoned his weapon moments before taking the shot. Confidential company files stolen from her servers mysteriously returned without explanation. Charlotte believed Noah was incredibly observant. She never imagined he had been eliminating every threat long before it reached her. The contract marriage happened when Charlotte's world began collapsing from within. Her grandfather's final will contained a condition that shocked both her and the board of directors. To retain controlling ownership of Sterling Global, she had to be legally married before the end of the fiscal year. Her grandfather believed a trusted partner would prevent ambitious investors from manipulating her, and although Charlotte considered the requirement outdated, breaking it meant surrendering the company her parents had built from nothing. Wealthy executives suddenly appeared with generous proposals disguised as romance. Influential politicians offered marriage in exchange for business alliances. Famous entrepreneurs competed for her attention, believing marrying America's most powerful CEO would multiply their own fortunes. Charlotte rejected every one of them. She refused to become another headline or another business transaction. Days before the deadline, exhausted and frustrated, she walked into the security office where Noah was reviewing surveillance footage alone. Without any dramatic speech, she placed a prepared contract on his desk and asked a question that changed both their lives forever. "Would you marry me for 1 year?" Noah looked at the document, then at Charlotte, his expression impossible to read. Most men would have hesitated. Others would have celebrated the opportunity. Noah simply signed the agreement without negotiating a single condition. He asked for no money beyond his salary, no shares in the company, and no public recognition. Charlotte found his response almost unbelievable. She assumed he accepted because he needed financial stability. The truth was something she could never have imagined. He had waited centuries for the woman whose fate had become tied to his own long before either of them entered this world. Their marriage remained strictly professional. Separate bedrooms. Separate routines. No public displays of affection beyond what cameras required. Employees whispered endlessly about the unusual couple. Tabloid reporters mocked Charlotte for marrying beneath her status, while business analysts predicted the marriage would collapse within months. Charlotte ignored every rumor, believing emotions only complicated decisions. Yet little by little, Noah's presence began changing the rhythm of her life. He quietly remembered how she preferred her coffee before morning meetings. He waited outside conference rooms during negotiations that lasted until midnight. He noticed when she skipped meals and somehow managed to place dinner on her desk without interrupting her work. Whenever she returned home exhausted, he was already there, making sure every door was locked before disappearing into the shadows of the mansion. Charlotte repeatedly reminded herself that their relationship existed only on paper, but there were moments when she caught herself watching him longer than necessary, wondering why someone with so little interest in wealth or recognition remained so devoted to protecting her. She had no answer. Standing on the burning rooftop now, surrounded by assassins, she realized one truth with painful clarity. Every person she had trusted for power had betrayed her. The one man she had underestimated was the only person still standing between her and certain death, and as the first rifle trigger was pulled, Charlotte saw something in Noah's eyes that no ordinary human should ever possess. The sharp crack of the first rifle echoed across the rooftop, and Charlotte instinctively closed her eyes, convinced the bullet would tear straight through Noah's back. Instead, silence followed. A silence so complete that even the roar of the burning skyscraper seemed to disappear. When Charlotte slowly opened her eyes, the bullet was hanging in the air less than an inch from Noah's chest. Then another stopped. And another. Within seconds, dozens of bullets floated motionless between the assassins and the quiet security guard they had mocked only moments earlier. Charlotte couldn't breathe. Her mind searched desperately for a logical explanation, but every answer she had ever believed in collapsed before her eyes. Noah never looked at the bullets. He never raised a weapon. He simply took one slow step forward, and every assassin suddenly lost the confidence that had brought them there. Their leader shouted for everyone to keep firing, yet the rifles refused to respond. Some jammed without reason. Others shattered in their owners' hands as though crushed by an invisible force. Panic spread through the attackers. They had been promised an easy execution. Instead, they found themselves trapped on a rooftop with a man who appeared completely untouched by death itself. Charlotte reached for Noah's arm, her fingers trembling as she whispered his name, hoping he would explain what she was witnessing. He gently moved her hand behind his back, keeping her safely out of sight. His voice remained calm, almost gentle, as he told her to stay exactly where she was no matter what happened next. Before she could ask another question, he looked directly at the assassins. The warmth Charlotte had grown familiar with over the past several months vanished from his face, replaced by an expression so cold that even the flames surrounding them seemed to lose their heat. His eyes slowly changed, first becoming darker than the night itself before glowing with a deep crimson light that reflected across the rooftop. The wind grew stronger. Thousands of bats circling above the skyscraper suddenly descended, forming a dark cloud that swallowed the moonlight. Several assassins stumbled backward, whispering terrified warnings into their radios. Others dropped their weapons entirely. Their leader stared at Noah with widening eyes before taking one hesitant step backward. "It can't be," he muttered. "He's supposed to be dead." Noah answered with only a few quiet words that sent visible fear through every man standing before him. "You touched what belongs to me." The sentence was neither loud nor angry, yet it carried an authority that seemed to command the darkness itself. What happened over the next few minutes would never appear in any police report because no camera managed to capture a single second of it. Every surveillance system inside the district failed simultaneously. Helicopters circling overhead lost their signal. News crews broadcasting live suddenly reported unexplained technical failures. Later, investigators would discover gaps in every recording, leaving behind only static where the confrontation should have been. Charlotte, however, saw everything with her own eyes. The assassins rushed forward together, abandoning their firearms and drawing blades coated with a strange black substance that shimmered beneath the firelight. Noah moved so quickly that Charlotte could barely follow him. One moment he stood beside her, and the next he appeared several yards away, effortlessly avoiding every strike aimed at him. The attackers fell one after another, but there was almost no sound, only brief flashes of movement followed by stunned expressions before they collapsed unconscious or simply disappeared into the shadows surrounding the rooftop. It was impossible. Charlotte had watched professional fighters before, but nothing compared to this. Noah wasn't fighting like a trained soldier. He moved with impossible precision, as though time itself slowed whenever he chose to act. The few assassins who managed to escape ran toward the stairwell in complete terror, shouting warnings that echoed through the smoke. "Run! The king is here! Run before he sees you!" Their desperate cries only deepened Charlotte's confusion. What king? What were they talking about? And why did they seem to recognize the man she believed she knew better than anyone else? Within moments, the rooftop became eerily quiet once again. The flames still consumed the upper floors of Sterling Global. Emergency vehicles continued flooding the streets below, yet every assassin had vanished as though they had never existed. Noah stood alone at the edge of the rooftop with his back facing Charlotte. His shoulders rose and fell in one slow breath before the crimson glow faded from his eyes. By the time he turned around, he looked exactly like the quiet security guard she had married. His tie was still perfectly straight. His suit carried no trace of dust despite the chaos around them. If Charlotte had not witnessed everything herself, she would have believed it had all been a nightmare. She slowly approached him, searching his face for answers. "Who are you?" she whispered, barely recognizing her own voice. Noah looked at her with the same gentle expression that had comforted her through countless difficult days. For a brief moment, it seemed as though he wanted to tell her the truth. Instead, he quietly answered, "Someone who made you a promise." Before Charlotte could press him further, the rooftop doors burst open as firefighters and emergency responders rushed toward them. Noah stepped away from her just enough to become invisible among the confusion once again. As paramedics checked Charlotte for injuries, detectives questioned witnesses, and reporters crowded outside the burning headquarters, no one noticed that Noah had disappeared without leaving a single trace. Charlotte searched every corridor, every staircase, and every emergency exit, but the man she had married had vanished into the night. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. Across the city, hidden beneath an abandoned cathedral where no ordinary person had walked for generations, ancient creatures had already learned that their king had finally revealed a fragment of his power to protect a human woman. And by dawn they would gather to decide whether Charlotte Bennett should be crowned beside him, or executed before another sunset. Charlotte barely remembered how she left the burning headquarters. The flashing lights from emergency vehicles blurred together as reporters shouted questions she could no longer hear. Every news station in America interrupted its regular programming to cover the destruction of Sterling Global. Financial experts immediately declared the company finished. Social media exploded with rumors that Charlotte Bennett had staged the fire herself to hide billions of dollars in missing investments. Others claimed foreign competitors had launched a coordinated attack. The truth was far stranger than anyone could imagine. Charlotte sat silently inside the back of a security vehicle, replaying the rooftop over and over in her mind. Bullets had stopped in midair. Armed men had fled in terror. They had called her quiet husband the king. Most unsettling of all, Noah had vanished without saying goodbye. Hours passed before he calmly walked into the temporary command center established for the investigation. His white shirt was perfectly clean, his suit showed no signs of smoke, and the calm expression on his face was exactly the same one he wore every morning when handing her a cup of coffee. Charlotte immediately stood and rushed toward him. Every question she had rehearsed disappeared the moment she looked into his eyes. "Where were you?" she demanded. Noah answered without hesitation. "Making sure no one followed you." It was such a simple response that it almost sounded believable, yet Charlotte knew there was far more hidden beneath those words. Before she could press him further, federal investigators interrupted them with devastating news. Nearly every member of her executive board had resigned overnight. Several major investors had frozen company funding. Banks demanded immediate repayment of outstanding loans. Sterling Global wasn't simply recovering from an attack. It was being dismantled piece by people Charlotte had trusted for years. Over the following week, betrayal revealed itself from every direction. Executives she had mentored testified against her before government investigators. Confidential research projects worth billions suddenly appeared in the hands of rival corporations. Even longtime friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with a company everyone believed was collapsing. Charlotte worked without sleep, determined to save the business her parents had dreamed of building, but every solution seemed to create another disaster. Through it all, Noah remained close without ever demanding recognition. He drove her to meetings, quietly stood outside conference rooms for hours, and waited beside the front door every night when she finally returned home exhausted. He never asked how her day had gone because somehow he already knew. He would simply place dinner on the table, remind her to rest, and disappear before dawn. Charlotte began noticing details she had ignored for months. She never once saw him eat. He never seemed tired regardless of how many nights passed without sleep. His reflection occasionally appeared strangely delayed in polished glass, disappearing for the briefest instant before returning. Once she accidentally cut her hand while opening a package. Noah reached out to steady her, and the small drop of blood landed across the back of his hand. For the first time since she had met him, his breathing changed. His jaw tightened ever so slightly before he quietly excused himself and walked out of the room. Charlotte followed him into the hallway, but found him standing alone beside an open window, his back turned as though struggling against something invisible. When he finally faced her again, his expression had returned to its familiar calm. He apologized, claiming he simply felt unwell. Charlotte accepted the explanation, but deep inside she knew he had lied. Far beneath the city, hidden behind enormous stone doors carved centuries before America existed as a nation, a gathering unlike any other had begun. Rows of ancient figures dressed in black stood beneath towering columns lit only by flickering flames. Some appeared no older than 30, while others carried faces marked by hundreds of years of existence. At the center of the chamber stood an empty throne carved from black stone. The atmosphere was tense as whispers spread through the assembly. Their king had broken the oldest law of their kind. For thousands of years, the ruler of the vampire clans had never taken a human as his wife. Doing so threatened centuries of secrecy that protected their existence from mankind. An elderly council member rose from his seat, his voice carrying throughout the chamber as he declared that Charlotte Bennett represented a danger to everything they had built. If humans discovered the identity of their king, every hidden kingdom would be exposed. Others argued that the king had already chosen, and questioning him bordered on treason. The debate ended the moment the massive doors slowly opened. Every voice fell silent. Noah entered the chamber wearing the same simple black suit Charlotte saw every day. Yet here, no one mistook him for an ordinary security guard. Every vampire in the hall immediately bowed their heads. The throne that had remained empty for generations was waiting only for him. Noah climbed the steps without speaking and looked across the gathering with calm authority. "My wife remains under my protection," he said quietly. "No one touches her." The statement should have ended the discussion, but from the shadows emerged a woman whose beauty was matched only by the hatred in her crimson eyes. She wore a dark crimson gown that flowed across the stone floor like liquid silk, and every vampire lowered their gaze as she approached. She was Lady Seraphine, commander of the royal bloodline and the only person bold enough to challenge the king directly. Her voice remained respectful, yet every word carried unmistakable defiance. "You may protect the human from our enemies," she said. "But can you protect her from your own heart? The longer she stays alive, the closer you come to choosing love over your kingdom." Noah's expression never changed, but for the first time in centuries, uncertainty flickered across the faces of those watching. They had followed an undefeated king through countless wars. Now they feared the only battle he might not win was the one taking place within himself. That same night, Charlotte sat alone in the master bedroom of the mansion, unable to sleep. Every unanswered question weighed heavier than before. She opened the drawer beside Noah's desk, searching for company records he had promised to organize, but instead discovered an old leather journal unlike anything she had ever seen. The pages contained maps of cities that no longer existed, handwritten entries dated hundreds of years apart, and sketches of a woman who looked exactly like Charlotte despite being drawn in clothing from another century. Her hands trembled as she turned another page and found a single sentence written in elegant ink. "No matter how many lifetimes pass, I will find you again." Before she could read another word, the bedroom door slowly opened behind her. Noah stood in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the journal in her hands. For the first time since their marriage, fear crossed his face, not fear for himself, but fear that the woman he had sworn to protect had just uncovered the first thread of a truth capable of changing both their destinies forever. Charlotte instinctively closed the journal the moment she saw Noah standing in the doorway. The room was so quiet that she could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Neither of them spoke for several long seconds. Noah slowly walked toward her, his eyes never leaving the weathered leather cover resting in her trembling hands. Charlotte had never seen him look unsettled before. The quiet confidence that had always surrounded him seemed to crack for the briefest moment. She stood up from the chair, holding the journal against her chest as though it contained the answer to every impossible question that had haunted her since the attack on Sterling Global. "Tell me the truth," she said softly. "Who are you?" Noah stopped only a few feet away. His expression was filled with conflict. He looked at Charlotte as if he had imagined this conversation countless times yet still could not find the words. "There are answers," he finally replied, "that can never be forgotten once they're spoken." Charlotte refused to look away. She had spent her career exposing lies inside boardrooms filled with powerful people. She could recognize when someone was hiding the truth, and the man standing before her had been hiding an entire lifetime. She opened the journal once more and pointed to the sketch of the woman wearing clothes from another century. The resemblance was impossible to deny. The same eyes, the same smile. Even the small birthmark beneath her left ear had been drawn perfectly. "Why does she look exactly like me?" Noah closed his eyes for a brief moment before answering with quiet sadness. "Because every time fate gives you another life, I find you again." Charlotte felt the floor beneath her seem to disappear. Every logical explanation she searched for vanished before those words. She stared at Noah, hoping he would smile and admit this was some elaborate misunderstanding, but his face remained completely serious. He gently took the journal from her hands and opened to the first page. The earliest entry was dated more than 600 years earlier. Every few decades another entry appeared, each written in the same elegant handwriting. Each described a different city, a different century, and a different woman whose face looked exactly like Charlotte. Some were artists. Some were teachers. Some lived ordinary lives on distant farms. Others belonged to wealthy families whose names had disappeared from history. Every story ended the same way. They died young. Sometimes through illness. Sometimes in war. Sometimes under mysterious circumstances that were never explained. Charlotte turned page after page until tears began filling her eyes. The final pages described events from only a few years earlier. They spoke of her childhood, the tragic accident that claimed her parents, her rise as CEO, and the day Noah accepted the position as her security guard. "You've been watching me my entire life," she whispered. Noah nodded slowly. Long before that. Charlotte stepped backward, overwhelmed by emotions she could no longer control. She should have been frightened. Instead, what hurt most was realizing he had carried this impossible burden completely alone. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. Noah lowered his head. "Because every time I did, I lost you." Before Charlotte could ask what he meant, every light inside the mansion suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed the room in an instant. The emergency generators failed to activate. Outside, the wind rose with unnatural force, rattling every window throughout the estate. Noah's head turned sharply toward the front entrance before anyone knocked. He already knew they had arrived. Charlotte heard heavy footsteps echo through the halls as dozens of security officers rushed toward the gates. Moments later, terrified screams shattered the silence. Gunfire erupted outside, followed by sounds unlike anything Charlotte had ever heard. She ran toward the nearest window, but Noah caught her wrist before she reached it. His grip remained gentle, yet firm enough to stop her. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. The calmness in his voice told Charlotte this wasn't the first time he had faced whatever waited beyond those doors. The massive iron gates surrounding the mansion exploded inward with enough force to send vehicles rolling across the driveway. Figures dressed in black cloaks advanced through the smoke without hesitation. Charlotte watched in disbelief as her security team opened fire, only for every bullet to pass harmlessly through several attackers before striking the stone walls behind them. Some moved with impossible speed. Others disappeared into clouds of black mist before reappearing several yards away. Within minutes, every guard protecting the estate lay unconscious. The intruders had not come to rob her fortune. They had come for one person. Charlotte Bennett. A tall woman stepped forward from the shadows with effortless grace. Her crimson gown flowed across the broken stone of the courtyard without collecting a single speck of dust. Her beauty was breathtaking, yet something in her eyes carried centuries of quiet cruelty. Charlotte immediately recognized her as the woman Noah had never mentioned, but whose presence somehow felt deeply connected to him. Lady Seraphine slowly smiled as she looked toward the mansion windows. "Your Majesty," she called, her voice echoing across the estate. "Must an entire kingdom wait because you've fallen in love with another human?" Charlotte looked at Noah in complete confusion. He said nothing. Instead, he calmly opened the front door and stepped outside alone. Charlotte ignored his warning and followed several steps behind. Moonlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the devastated courtyard as Noah faced the woman without fear. Every cloaked figure immediately lowered their heads in respect toward him, confirming what Charlotte's heart had already begun to accept. These people weren't his enemies alone. They were his subjects. Seraphine's smile slowly disappeared as she turned her attention toward Charlotte. "Do you know," she asked almost sympathetically, "how many women he has mourned? How many lifetimes he has watched end while remaining exactly the same? You believe you're his wife, but to him you're another chapter in a story that refuses to end." Charlotte felt those words strike deeper than any weapon ever could. She looked toward Noah, silently begging him to deny the accusation. He didn't. Instead, he quietly admitted the one truth he had spent centuries trying to hide. "I have loved her in every lifetime." The confession left the courtyard completely silent. Charlotte's heart pounded as memories she had never lived began flashing through her mind like fragments of forgotten dreams. A medieval castle. Snow-covered mountains. A candlelit chapel. A battlefield beneath a blood-red moon. Faces she had never met somehow felt familiar. Tears rolled down her cheeks before she even understood why. Seraphine watched with satisfaction, knowing the truth had finally begun awakening inside Charlotte. "It has started," she whispered. She remembers. Before anyone could move, the ground beneath the mansion trembled violently. The ancient fountain at the center of the courtyard shattered into thousands of pieces as a deafening roar echoed from somewhere beneath the earth. Every vampire present immediately looked toward the distant mountains surrounding the city. Even Noah's calm expression changed. Whatever had awakened was powerful enough to frighten creatures that had lived for centuries. Seraphine slowly stepped backward, her confidence replaced by genuine concern. "It's too early," she said under her breath. The Blood Sovereign should still be sleeping. Noah immediately turned toward Charlotte, taking both of her hands as his crimson eyes met hers. For the first time since they had met, he looked truly afraid. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "Everything changes tonight. No matter what happens next, do not let anyone separate us." Charlotte barely had time to nod before the night sky split apart with a blinding crimson light, and a voice so ancient that it seemed older than the world itself echoed across the heavens. "Return the queen, or every kingdom shall fall." The crimson light stretching across the heavens did not fade. Instead, it spread farther, covering the moon until the entire city stood beneath a sky that looked as though it had been painted with blood. Every person still awake stopped what they were doing. Drivers abandoned their cars in the middle of highways. Families stepped onto their balconies in stunned silence. News helicopters attempting to cover the destruction at Sterling Global suddenly lost communication before disappearing from every radar screen. Scientists would later search for explanations, blaming rare atmospheric conditions, solar disturbances, and equipment failure, but none of those theories came close to the truth. Charlotte stood frozen beside Noah as the ancient voice echoed once again, louder than before, shaking the earth beneath their feet. "Return the queen, or every kingdom shall fall." She looked toward Noah, hoping he would finally tell her everything. Instead, he gently placed his hand against her cheek, his touch filled with a tenderness that carried centuries of unspoken love. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I wanted you to have one lifetime where you could live as an ordinary woman." Charlotte searched his face through her tears. "Then don't leave me now." Noah smiled sadly. "I never have." The mountains surrounding the city erupted with countless shadows pouring into the night sky. They were not clouds. They were armies. Tens of thousands of winged creatures crossed the horizon like a living storm, their crimson eyes glowing beneath the moonlight. At the same time, the streets below filled with creatures emerging from abandoned subway tunnels, forgotten churches, and hidden passageways beneath the oldest parts of the city. For generations they had remained hidden among humanity, living quietly under ancient laws established by their king. Tonight those laws no longer mattered. Every hidden kingdom had been summoned. Vampires knelt as Noah stepped forward, no longer pretending to be an ordinary man. A powerful wind surrounded him, lifting the smoke from the ruined courtyard into the sky. His black suit transformed into regal armor woven with silver markings older than any known language. A long crimson cloak flowed behind him as dark wings slowly unfolded from his back, stretching farther than Charlotte believed possible. His eyes burned like twin embers beneath the crimson moon, yet when he turned to look at her, they still carried the same warmth she had fallen in love with. He had never changed. Only the truth had finally revealed itself. Charlotte realized the quiet man who had made her coffee before early meetings, waited patiently outside conference rooms, and carried her home when she worked until exhaustion was the very same king now commanding an army with nothing more than a single glance. Lady Seraphine slowly lowered herself onto one knee along with every vampire surrounding the estate. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing her head. "The Blood Sovereign has awakened." Noah's expression hardened. "I know." Charlotte looked between them, struggling to understand. Noah finally spoke the truth he had hidden for centuries. Long before modern nations existed, the supernatural world had been united under one ruler known as the Blood Sovereign, a being whose hunger for absolute power nearly erased humanity from existence. Noah, then only a young prince, had led the rebellion that sealed the sovereign beneath the earth. The victory came with a terrible cost. An ancient prophecy declared that one day the sovereign would return, and only the union of the vampire king and the queen marked by destiny could stop him forever. That queen had lived many lives, reborn again and again across centuries, never remembering who she truly was. Noah had found her in every lifetime, loved her in every lifetime, and lost her in every lifetime before the prophecy could be fulfilled. Charlotte felt her heart ache as forgotten memories flooded her mind with increasing clarity. She saw herself standing beside Noah in another age beneath towering castle walls. She remembered dancing with him beneath candlelight in a forgotten kingdom. She remembered dying in his arms while promising she would find him again. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered words she didn't realize she still knew. "I kept making you wait." The ground suddenly split open beyond the estate as enormous cracks raced across the landscape. A towering figure slowly emerged from the darkness beneath the earth, surrounded by waves of crimson energy that bent trees and shattered stone. His presence alone forced countless vampires to their knees. Even the night seemed to recoil from him. His voice rolled across the city like thunder. "So this is the woman you chose over eternity." Charlotte instinctively stepped in front of Noah despite knowing she stood no chance against such a creature. Noah gently moved her behind him with a faint smile that carried both pride and heartbreak. "You still protect others before yourself," he said softly. The Blood Sovereign laughed, amused by the human woman's courage. "Love has made you weak, King," Noah answered without raising his voice. "Love made me worth following." At that moment, something extraordinary happened. Every vampire surrounding the battlefield rose to their feet and stood beside their king rather than retreating. Lady Seraphine stepped forward, drawing her blade and placing herself between Charlotte and the sovereign. She looked at Charlotte with new respect. "Forgive me," she said quietly. "I mistook your humanity for weakness. I understand now why he never stopped searching for you." Charlotte nodded through her tears, realizing the woman she believed was her rival had become one of her strongest allies. The battle that followed would never appear in history books because no ordinary human survived long enough to remember it clearly. The night sky became a battlefield of wings, crimson light, and ancient power as vampires fought to protect both their king and the woman destiny had chosen. Charlotte watched Noah confront the Blood Sovereign with a strength unlike anything she had ever witnessed, yet she also saw him growing weaker each time he shielded her from attacks meant to destroy them both. She finally understood the greatest secret he had carried all along. Every time he protected her across centuries, he surrendered a portion of his own immortality. Loving her had never made him stronger. It had slowly cost him everything. Refusing to watch him sacrifice himself again, Charlotte stepped forward and reached for his hand. The moment their fingers intertwined, brilliant crimson and silver light erupted around them, illuminating the battlefield so brightly that the darkness itself retreated. Every forgotten memory returned to Charlotte at once. She remembered every lifetime, every farewell, every promise, every sacrifice, and every moment Noah had stood beside her even when she could no longer remember his face. She looked into his eyes and smiled through her tears. "You found me," she whispered. Noah's voice trembled for the first time in centuries. "I always will." The light surrounding them surged across the battlefield, reaching the Blood Sovereign before he could strike again. The ancient ruler cried out as the power of their united bond shattered the curse that had sustained him for thousands of years. His enormous form slowly dissolved into countless particles of crimson light that drifted into the night before disappearing forever. As silence settled over the city, the crimson sky gradually returned to its natural color. The bats vanished. The wind calmed. Dawn broke across the horizon, bathing the damaged skyline in warm golden light. Noah's wings slowly disappeared, his royal armor fading until he once again stood before Charlotte wearing the simple black suit of the security guard she had first underestimated. He smiled with quiet relief, but before Charlotte could speak, he collapsed into her arms. She held him tightly, terrified she had lost him at last. After several long moments, he opened his eyes and laughed softly. "I suppose even kings need some rest." Charlotte laughed through her tears before gently kissing him as the first rays of sunlight touched the city they had fought to protect. Months later, Sterling Global reopened stronger than ever, exposing the executives who had betrayed her and rebuilding every life the attack had tried to destroy. The world believed the mysterious events surrounding the fire were nothing more than unexplained coincidences. Only Charlotte knew the truth. By day, Noah remained the quiet security guard everyone continued to underestimate. By night, he ruled a hidden kingdom that protected humanity from dangers it would never know existed. Together they proved that the greatest strength was never wealth, power, or immortality. It was choosing to stand beside the person you love, lifetime after lifetime, no matter how impossible the journey became. And somewhere high above the city, beneath a peaceful full moon, the Vampire King and his queen looked toward the future, knowing that whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together, and this time, nothing would ever separate them again.